This is Jacob's Algebra, Chapter 11, Lesson 6. This continues with multiplying algebraic fractions. So the start of this lesson is converting mixed numbers to fractions and how you can multiply mixed numbers. So let's say you had the mixed numbers 2 and 1/3 and 3 and 1/4, and you wanted to multiply these. Now you might think that you could just multiply your whole numbers, 2 times 3 and get 6, multiply your fractions, 1/3 times 1/4 and get 1/12, but that would be wrong. 2 and 1/3 is really the same as 2 plus 1/3. Sorry, that's supposed to be a plus there. 3 and 1/4 is really the same as 3 plus 1/4. And so we actually need to do binomial multiplication here. So I'm going to draw a grid. Let me try that again. I'm going to draw a grid and put in my grid lines and multiply this out. So we have grab the wrong tool. We have 2 and 1/3, and then we have 3 and 1/4. 2 times 3 is 6. 3 times 1/3 is 1. 1/4 times 2 is 1/2. 1/4 times 1/3 is 1/12. 12th. So you can see we do have the 6 and the 1/12 here, but we also have a 1 and a 1/2. So when we multiply all this out, what we get is 6 plus 1 plus 1/2 plus 1/12. Well, the 6 plus 1, that's just 7. 1/2, that's the same as 6/12. And then we have a 1/12. Since we have a common denominator here, that means we can add these. So we have 7 and 7/12. The other way that we can work this is to convert each of these mixed numbers into an improper fraction. 2 and 1/3 is actually 7/3. 3 and 1/4 is actually 13/4. If you don't remember how to convert mixed numbers to improper fractions, you take your whole number, you multiply it by the denominator, 2 times 3 is 6, and then you add the numerator. So 6 plus 1 is 7. That's how I got 7/3. For 3 and 1/4, I take my whole number 3, multiply it by the denominator, 3 times 4 is 12, and then I add the numerator, 12 plus 1 is 13, 13/4. So when I multiply 7 times 13, I get 91. When I multiply 3 times 4, I get 12. And then I can divide the 12 into 91. 12 goes into 91 7 times with 7 left over, so that's 7/12. 7 and 7/12. We get the same answer either way. So we can also do this with algebraic fractions. So what if we had x plus 1 over x times x plus 5 over x? Well, I would use the grid method because when you use the grid method, you are much more likely to get everything multiplied out correctly. So I'm going to draw my grid and put in my grid lines. Whoops. Okay. Okay, so now I am going to write my numbers. I have x, and I have 1 over x. I have x, and then I have 5 over x. X times x is x squared. X times 1 over x is 1. 5 over x times x is 5. 5 over x times 1 over x is 5 over x squared. So what I get is x squared plus 1 plus 5 plus 5 over x squared, which works out to x squared plus 6 plus 5 over x squared. Now, our other way of working this is to convert each one of these factors into single fractions. So when we have x plus 1 over x, I can convert that to a single fraction by multiplying my x by x over x so that we have the common denominator. We have the common denominator of x. X times x is x squared, and then we add our 1. So that first fraction is x squared plus 1 over x. Our second factor is x plus 5 over x. X plus 5 over x. X is our denominator, so we need to multiply by x over x. That is our common denominator. So we have x times x is x squared, and then we add the 5. So we can multiply these two things together, and we can make a grid to do that. So let's do a grid and put in our grid lines. Okay, so we have x squared plus 1, and we have x squared plus 5. X squared times x squared is x to the 4th. X squared times 5 is 5x squared. 1 times x squared is x squared. 1 times 5 is 5. So what we end up with is x to the 4th plus, we have 5x squared plus x squared, that's 6x squared, plus 5 all over. We're going to have a common denominator of x squared. And the reason why that's true is because we're going to be multiplying x squared plus 1 over x times x squared plus 5 over x. What we have in our grid is the product of x squared plus 1 and x squared plus 5. In the denominator, we need the product of x and x, which is x squared. And then we can divide x squared into each of these terms. X to the 4th divided by x squared is x squared. 6x squared divided by x squared is 6. And 5 divided by x squared is 5 over x squared. So you can see we get the same answer either way. Okay, so let's start doing some of the problems that are in set 2. So we're going to start with number 4. And number 4 is just like number 9 that I assigned for homework. So when I finish working through number 4, you should stop the video and work number 9 from set 3. So number 4 says express the following products as integers or fractions in simplest terms. Remember, it says simplest terms. That means you must simplify your answer. So let's start with part D. Part D says 10/7 times 14. When we're multiplying, we always look for common factors first. Is there something that's a common factor in the numerator and denominator? So you can see we've got a 14 and a 7. Those can both be divided by 7. 7 divided by 7 is 1. 14 divided by 7 is 2. So now in our numerator, we have 10 times 2 is 20. Our denominator is just 1. So that simplifies to 20. If you stop at 20 divided by 1, your answer is not correct. You have not finished the problem. You must simplify. Okay, part F says x times -8 over x. Again, when you're multiplying fractions, you look for common terms in the numerator and denominator. We can see there's an x over here. We can say that it's a fraction over 1. X and x are obviously common. So I can cross them both out and replace them with 1s. I have 1 times -8 is -8. And I have 1 times 1 for the denominator. That simplifies to just a -8. And then I have part H. Part H is 3 over 4x cubed times x squared. Again, we can write x squared as a fraction over 1. We're looking for common terms in the numerator and denominator. Common factors. So we have an x squared in the numerator and x cubed in the denominator. That means we can divide both of these by x squared. X squared divided by x squared is 1. X cubed divided by x squared is x. So our numerator is 3 times 1, which is 3. Our denominator is 4 times x times 1, which is 4x. And that's as far as you can go with this one. So this was number 4. It's just like number 9 that I assigned as homework. Remember that you must simplify your answer. You cannot stop until you have it in lowest terms. Okay, so now we're going to move on to problem number 5. Problem number 5 is just like number 10 that I assigned for homework. It says write each of the following as an integer or fraction in simplest terms. Notice you must put it in simplest terms. So what we're going to start with is parts E and F. Parts E and F use the same terms. One is multiplied, the other is added. So for part E, we have 6 times x over x minus 6. For part F, we have 6 plus x over x minus 6. So the top one where we have the product, remember anytime you are multiplying, you look to see if there's if there's a common factor in the numerator and denominator. There is not in this case. because there is no x minus 6 in the numerator. So we can just multiply across our numerator. We can write 6 as a fraction over 1. So our numerator is 6 times x, which is 6x. Our denominator is 1 times x minus 6, which is x minus 6. And we're done with part E. For part F, it's a little bit more difficult. We have 6 plus x over x minus 6. We need to use x minus 6 as our common denominator. So the 6, we're going to multiply by x minus 6 over x minus 6. And then we'll add x over x minus 6. That x minus 6, the entire thing needs to be multiplied by 6. So we have 6x minus 36, because 6 times x is 6x. 6 times negative 6 is negative 36. And then we're going to add our x. And all of that is going to be over x minus 6. We do not multiply our denominators together because we are adding these. When you are adding fractions, you have to have a common denominator, and then that denominator stays the same. Okay, so we have like terms in the numerator. 6x and x is 7x, and then minus 36 over x minus 6, and that's as much as we can do with part F. So now let's jump over to part I and parts I and J. Part I says x minus 1 times x over 4. And part J is x minus 1 plus x over 4. Okay, so let's do the product first. We look for common terms in the numerator and the denominator. Is there a 4 in the numerator? There is not. So we just multiply across the top. We can write our x minus 1 as x minus 1 over 1. X minus 1 times x is x squared minus x. 1 times 4 is 4. And that's as far as we can go with number 5, part I. For part J, we are adding. When we're adding, that means we must get a common denominator. We have a 4 over here. The x minus 1 we can write as a fraction of 1. To change it to a fraction of 4, we need to multiply it by 4 over 4. Okay, so we have a common denominator of 4. 4 times x is 4x. 4 times negative 1 is negative 4. And then we need to add an x, plus x. So now we add our like terms. We have 4x and x, that is 5x. And then we subtract 4, and that is all over 4. Whoops, that is not writing well. Okay, here we go. Okay, so that was number 5, part J. We're going to do 2 more parts here for number 5. Let's look at number 5, parts K and L. Part K is 1 over x plus 7 times x plus 7. And part L is 1 over x plus 7 plus x plus 7. So we'll do the product first. Again, we look for common terms in the numerator and the denominator. We can look at x plus 7 as x plus 7 over 1. And you can see our x plus 7 is going to cancel out. So that answer is just 1, because x plus 7 divided by x plus 7 is 1. Now, in our sum for part L, we have 1 over x plus 7 plus x plus 7. This second fraction we can look as a fraction of 1. We need our common denominator to be this x plus 7. So we need to multiply this by x plus 7 over x plus 7. So now we have a common denominator of x plus 7. We'll write down our 1. And then we need to write down the product of x plus 7 and x plus 7. So in case you do not know what that product is, we're going to do a grid diagram to solve it. So here we go. Draw my grid lines. Okay, let's get this written down real quick. We have x plus 7. We have x plus 7, x squared, 7x, 7x, 49. So what we have here is 1 plus x squared plus 7x plus 7x is going to be 14x plus 49. So we end up with x squared plus 14x plus 50 over x plus 7. So you need to stop this now and go do problem number 10 that was assigned from set 3. And then come back for part 2 where we will work through numbers 6, 7, and 8.